Welcome to the Cheating and Love Tales channel. Monday evening, the kids were already asleep in their rooms at the other end of the hall. Matt and Lynn sat in bed side by side, propped up with pillows. He was reading a book about the Civil War, and she was editing a marketing report. With a quiet sigh, Matt closed his book and turned on his side to look at his wife. He always liked how the tip of her tongue would peek out slightly when she was focused. Her pen hovered over the paper as she absent-mindedly tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Lynn," he said. She replied without looking up. Matt waited, and after a moment, she turned to look at him. "Do you love him?" Lynn froze and paled slightly. She looked at him silently, unable to bring herself to play the game of asking who or trying to lie. Matt deserved better. "No," she said. "So it's just about sex." "Matt, she began, trying to meet his gaze. Then she lowered her eyes to the papers on her lap. "Yes, I think it's just about sex. Flirting, then sex." "I see," he said. Silence. "I think I would like you to sleep in the guest room," he said, his voice calm and quiet. She nodded and got out of bed. Slipping her feet into her slippers, she reached for the robe on the chair. "Unless, of course, you slept with him in this bed. If you did, I'll never sleep in it again." "No," she said. "I didn't do that." She wanted to say, "How could you think I could do such a thing?" But it would have been ridiculous, given the circumstances. Without saying another word, Matt turned off the light on the nightstand and lay down, turning his back to her. Lynn looked at him for a minute, her face tinged with pain. Then she quietly left the room, closing the door behind her. Friday evening, when Matt got home, the house was filled with delicious smells. He hung up his coat, and Lynn came out of the kitchen to greet him with a smile, though she didn't dare come too close. She was wearing one of her nice aprons, the one she wore when they had guests. "Beth and Jason are having dinner at the Frankels. I decided to cook something nice for us tonight," she said, trying to keep the smile on her face. Matt glanced into the dining room. The table was set with a tablecloth, their good china, and two of their best wine glasses. There were candles, cloth napkins, and silver napkin rings. Matt nodded. "Smells good. I'll go wash up and be down in a few minutes." When he returned, Lynn was just bringing the food in from the kitchen. She served each of them a portion of roast chicken along with potatoes and green beans. On one side, there was a beautiful bowl of salad with orange slices. They sat down, and Lynn beamed at her husband, though the tension was still noticeable on her face. "It looks very nice," Matt said. Then, without hesitation, he stood up and climbed onto a chair, towering over the table. As Lynn watched in bewilderment and then horror, he unbuttoned his pants, took out a bottle of liquid, and slowly, carefully, and thoroughly poured its contents all over the table. He splashed the chicken, potatoes, salad, and even the wine-filled glasses. "Matt, what?" Lynn almost shouted in disbelief, her eyes wide with shock and horror. Matt fastened his pants and got off the chair. He looked intently at Lynn. "I thought you might want to know what it's like when someone does something to something you care about, something you've invested a lot of time, love, and effort into. I thought it could be a valuable experience." Lynn didn't respond, only staring at her husband as tears ran down her cheeks. Matt approached the closet, took his coat, and left the house. Sunday daytime. "I requested a transfer," she said. "Oh, I'm being transferred to the internal marketing department in a week. I wanted it to happen as soon as possible. I'll be in the building on Union Street, farther away from where I am now." "And why did you request the transfer?" "I thought you liked the international department. So I won't be near Douglas anymore. I won't be in the same office." He stopped raking leaves and turned to look at her, standing beside him in her colorful autumn sweater. "And why should that matter to me?" She looked both annoyed and hurt. "Because I won't be seeing him anymore. That's all. I wanted you to know that." He turned back to the rake. "Lynn, you've already told me it's over." "Of course, I believe you and trust you completely. Can you think of even one reason why I wouldn't? She stomped her foot slightly. Damn it, Matt. Do you really think your sarcasm is helping? And do you really think that moving out of that office will make everything better? As if there aren't motels, lunch hours, breakfast meetings, or client meetings outside the office. As if there aren't plenty of other men who would gladly sleep with you until they forget their own names. Matt's voice rose to a snarl, but he continued raking the leaves into neat piles, not looking at her. Matt, she said in a thin, sad voice. What else can I do? I'm trying everything I can, every way I know. She began to cry. To show you how sorry I am. To somehow make amends for what I've done. He turned to her again. And you think there's a way to make amends? Some magic formula. Just the right words, actions, or gestures, and everything will be fixed. Understand this, Lynn, you're living in a goddamn dream world. He turned away again and went back to his raking. Monday evening, Lynn heard footsteps down the hall. Then Beth's sleepy and confused head appeared in the doorway. Mommy, why are you sleeping in the guest room? Although she was almost 6 years old, she still spoke with a slight lisp, especially when she was sleepy. I stayed up late working, sweetheart, and I'm here so I don't disturb Daddy. Did you have a bad dream? Beth solemnly nodded, and Lynn jumped out of bed to pick her up. Sleep with me, Betty. You and Big Bear. She tucked her daughter and the teddy bear under the blanket with her and lay down beside them. Within 5 minutes, Beth was sound asleep again. Lynn gently picked her and the teddy bear up and carried them back to Beth's room. On her way back to the guest room, she suddenly changed her mind and headed to the master bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and the room was dark. Lynn paused, trying to find the right words, but was stopped by an unexpected sound. It was crying. Matt was quietly sobbing, probably into his pillow. Lynn stood there, listening, then slowly turned away and walked back down the hall to the guest room. Wednesday morning. Each day it became easier to sit in his office and work, to concentrate on what needed to be done. His thoughts still drifted to painful places, but not as often and not for as long. His secretary, Bernice, knew something was wrong, but she sensed that he didn't want to talk about it, and stopped asking, offering only sympathetic smiles. At 10:50, he got up from his chair, walked to his door, and closed it. Then he took a dictionary from the bookshelf and placed it on the desk. He found the word he was looking for and read the definition aloud. Cuckold. A man with an unfaithful wife. He sat back down. I am a cuckold, he said it several times. The word felt strange in his mouth. I am a cuckold. I've been cuckolded. She cuckolded me. He sat for a while, staring into space. Then, with a sigh, he set the dictionary aside and returned to his work. Saturday. For heaven's sake, Lynn, what on earth did you expect? Lynn didn't answer, and her friend Arlene continued. They were sitting in Arlene's kitchen, 2 cups of coffee between them. Sleeping behind Matt's back with some other guy. Arlene saw Lynn flinch at the word but went on. And now you're surprised that he's angry and hurt. I'm not surprised, Arlene. Does he know how long it went on? Lynn shook her head. I have no idea. I don't know how he found out or when. He doesn't want to. We haven't talked about it. Do you think if you told him it was only a few times, it would make a difference? Not for me, Lynn gasped. I mean, if it were the other way around. If he had slept with some other woman 5 times, 20 times, I'd still be torn apart. So don't think I'm surprised. I'm not surprised, not one bit. I just don't know what to do. I can't reach him, and I don't know what the hell to do. She lowered her eyes, stirring her coffee with a spoon, while Arlene watched her silently. 3 weeks later, Wednesday afternoon. No, Matt said firmly. Then, a bit softer, no. I don't want her to tell me about it. The therapist frowned slightly. She had short dark hair, almost a Beatles haircut, and wore a brown corduroy sweater. Her name was Isabel Harshman. Don't you think it might help both of you, so you know why Lynn did what she did?" Matt looked at her, not even glancing at his wife sitting beside him. "I think it might help Lynn to get it off her chest, but I don't see how it can help me. Honestly, Dr. Harshman, I feel like I'm already suffering enough." Hesitantly, Lynn said, "I thought that if I told you about it, how it happened and why, then you would understand that I could never do anything like that again." Matt turned and looked at her. "Do you really believe that? Do you honestly think there's anything you can say that will restore my trust in you, Lynn? That will make me feel like I don't have to worry about you for the rest of my life, wondering when you'll jump into bed with another man." Lynn looked down at her lap. Very quietly, she said, "No, Matt, I don't think there's anything I can say to do that." 2 months later, Thursday evening. "Oh, Matt, it's so beautiful here." She smiled at him broadly, squeezing his hand across the table. They were sitting at a table on the veranda, overlooking the Caribbean Sea. The air was delightfully warm, and there was still a red hue of the sunset in the sky. Between them on the table were a pitcher of sangria and a plate of grilled shrimp. "Beautiful, isn't it?" His smile in return didn't quite match hers. There was some tension on his face, perhaps around the eyes. He squeezed her hand for a few moments in response, then picked up his fork to spear another shrimp. "Thank you so much for agreeing to come south with me." Lynn knew it was hard for him to hold her gaze for more than a moment. An hour later, they were making love in their room. Later, they lay side by side, Matt on his back with his hands behind his head, and Lynn snuggled against him, with her head on his chest. "That was wonderful, baby," she murmured in a low, relaxed voice, and Matt reached down to gently stroke her back. She seemed almost asleep, but then she lifted her head to look at him, and said, "It's not that I don't enjoy it, but lately, it seems like every time we're intimate, you always come from behind." She giggled. "Are you trying to make me your girl?" she asked playfully. Matt looked at her, his brow slightly furrowed. He sighed. "When we do it, missionary, I watch your face, your expression, and I can't stop seeing you with him, imagining you looking at him the same way." Matt didn't finish the sentence. They lay still, and Lynn suddenly felt a chill. A few minutes later, Matt got up, put on shorts and a t-shirt, slipped into his sandals, and left the room. 5 weeks later, Sunday evening. Most of the time, they worked in silence, standing in front of the bookshelves on opposite sides of the room. Lynn was sorting through their CDs while Matt was organizing the books. He said, "Should I keep the Dickens novels? I've read them all. It's up to you. Take them if you want. I'll never read them." She grabbed another handful of CDs and placed the ones that belonged to Matt in a small pile next to her. Then she turned and looked at him. She watched the muscles in his back move under his tank top, how every movement was smooth and precise. It was all so familiar that tears welled up in her eyes. In a low voice, she said, "You know, this isn't what I want. I never wanted this." Matt froze for a moment but didn't turn around. He held back a response and returned to the books. Words weren't necessary. Both knew what he would have said. 7 weeks later, Saturday evening. Mommy, Beth and Jason shouted as they jumped out of Matt's car and ran into the house to hug her, leaving their overnight bags on the ground. Both started talking at once, telling her about the zoo and how giraffes were their favorites. They have such long necks. And how Dad bought them each some cotton candy. Then, after the greetings, they ran past her into the living room and turned on the TV. Matt smiled as he walked into the house carrying the bags the kids had left behind. Lynn smiled back. "Looks like they enjoyed the zoo." I still can't tell if they were thrilled or terrified. We got really close to the giraffes. They were towering over the wall right above our heads. And they also loved the giant tortoises. It was a good day. They chatted for another minute or two. Lynn said, "Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee? The pot's on the stove." No thanks," he said, feeling slightly awkward. "I really should get going. All right, Lynn said, trying to keep a smile on her face. See you Wednesday evening, he said, turning back to his car. She stood and watched him until the tourists reached the end of the street and turned left, disappearing from view. 4 months later, Monday evening, Beth was sitting at the kitchen table, coloring, while Lynn prepared dinner. Jason was on the floor assembling his favorite wooden jigsaw puzzle for the 500th time. It was a colorful clown with 17 pieces. "Mommy, are friends supposed to kiss?" Beth asked, looking expectantly at her mother. Lynn turned to look at her. "I don't know, dear. What do you mean?" "Well, I never kiss Artie, Melissa, or my school friends." She made a face. "It's so gross to kiss Artie. But we met Daddy's friend, and they keep kissing." Jason looked up from his puzzle. "Angela is nice," he said. "Yes, she is nice. She made us hot dogs and mac and cheese." Jason interrupted, then lost interest in the conversation, and went back to his puzzle. "Yeah, and she also said we could get ice cream next time. But she and Daddy keep kissing, you know, like you and Daddy used to do. Friends always kiss." Lynn squeezed her eyes shut tightly for a moment. Then she opened them and smiled at Beth. "Well, dear, some friends kiss, and some don't. It all depends on the circumstances. But kids your age don't kiss their friends, so you don't have to worry about that, okay?" Beth nodded and went back to her coloring. She was drawing a duck that looked a lot like a stegosaurus. "Dinner time," Lynn called. "Go wash your hands." When the kids returned to the table, she said, "At least 2 pieces of broccoli each, or no dessert tonight." She watched as they put ketchup on their burgers and started eating. Then she went back to her bedroom and closed the door. She sat in the chair by the bed, put her face in her hands, and cried.